Welcome to Sitting with Sally. I have with me Gloria Alcock, who wrote the book Nurse at the Top of the World by Gloria Alcock Hunter, as she was known then, but it's now Gloria. We did a program before where she came in with all of her artifacts from Tuktoyaktuk and Resolute Bay. Unfortunately, they are packed, and we'll hear why later on in the show, but welcome back, Gloria.
Thank you.
Partly because there's so many things we didn't get to talk about, and partly because people I ran into kept on saying, what a great show. Let's hear more from Gloria. So, dew line. The dew line is fascinating. It no longer exists, but when you were at the top of the world, the dew line was a very important part of your world.
Yes, it was at the height of the Cold War, and so the NATO nations kicked in the money, with the United States taking the lead, and they built a distant early warning, hence DEW, distant early warning radar line. So it started over in Alaska and it went right across to Jodrell Bank in England. That meant that there were main sites, and then there were sub-sites and so on, right across the whole of Canada.
They had the big radars.
The great big radars and those golf ball things that look as if golf balls are on steroids. And the one they had in Tuk has been moved to Inuvik. So when I was up in Inuvik a few years ago, I thought, oh, I know that. They took down the big radar screens. There are still, as you travel along the Mackenzie River, I did the ice road, you can still see the eye sites, the little, some modules left. So yes, it finally came to an end because technology improved.
And the early warning sign was in case Russia was going to lob nuclear...
Exactly. My brother was flying in supplies before they activated it, and he was told, don't land at site so-and-so because the runway lights are out. That was the Russians telling him. And a few minutes later, the dew line people came on and they said, don't land at site so-and-so because the runway lights are out. So the Russians knew exactly what was going on.
The Russians were watching us, we were watching them, and...
It was very frightening, actually, to know that the Russians were so close. And if any of you watched that very ancient movie with Raymond Massey called The 49th Parallel, that's when Germans, the Nazis came in a submarine into Hudson's Bay, and they came across Canada. And that frightened me. I was just a child when it happened. But I was very frightened that the Russians could come in, and what would we do?
Well, there really was quite a... people who weren't around at that time really forget how tense it was. There was the 60 missile crisis for the United States and Cuba, and people really did worry that the world as we knew it was going to be ended by a Russian nuclear attack.
In fact, one time I was walking back from a house visit, and I saw trucks go by, and I thought, all the trucks were put into storage. So why are the trucks out? I'd also heard a large 4-engine plane land, and I thought, oh my goodness, the Russians have landed. And look at the hairs going up my arms just as I think of it. So as soon as I got back to the nursing station, I phoned the Mounties and I said, is everything all right? And they said, sure. They must have thought that new nurse is a ding-a-ling. But I was so frightened that maybe the Russians had, in fact, landed.
And you didn't know about it.
I didn't know about it.
And the dew line stations, they were manned by people who came up, I presume mostly men, because...
All men.
All men. You didn't send women that far north
no.
in those days.
No.
And it was a fairly isolated posting.
They received a lot of money. I remember one fella, he was complaining. He had to pay so much income tax, and I thought, well, tough apples. You're paying more income tax than I earn.
And nowhere to spend it. Now, the dew line had a radio that, tell me about how you communicated with the outside world, because that's something else that with our cell phones people can't understand
Okay,
today.
the nursing station had a radio, this big.
Kind of.
Yeah, about the size of this table. And it had all sorts of buttons and lights that flashed, and you'd flick on things, and then you'd say, XMI 416, tuck, calling XMI 417 Inuvik, do you read, do you read? And then there'd be a big hissy, and then you'd say XMI 416, tuck, calling XMI 417 Inuvik, do you read, do you read? And if you were lucky, once in a while they'd say, oh, this is XMI 417 Inuvik, calling XMI 416, tuck. And you had to say everything twice.
You're saying it like you did it yesterday.
Well, I did it enough times to have it mentally impressed.
Now, if you couldn't, were there times that your radio couldn't get through?
That's true. In that case, you did a lot of praying. And if you were lucky, maybe the dew line, they might have picked you up on, the men had nothing to do except work shifts. And so they would have short wave. And so they'd pick our calling up. And then they would use their military lines, which would go down to someplace in the States, and then back up to Edmonton, who then would get back into Inuvik. And Inuvik would say, oh, there's something going on in Tuk, maybe we should. So they'd have to go through all these military lines to find out what was going on in Tuk, because their communications were out too.
And what, can you remember any emergency that happened when you really did rely on the dew line?
Yes, we had a woman, he who kicked babies out of wombs, who we've talked about, he had given her a thorough beating and a good kicking. So she came in labor, and we took a look at her and thought, oh my hat, she's about 28 to 30 weeks pregnant. And we figured she's going to lose this baby. Even so, we did get the incubator organized in case the baby could survive. And she started to bleed a teeny weeny bit. And we were on the radio calling and calling and calling and no response. And she kept bleeding. And we were terrified to go in and do a vaginal, because she might have had what you call a placenta previa. So the placenta's down here instead of here. And if you stick your fingers in there, you're going to have a massive bleed. So we didn't want to tinker around down there. And she kept bleeding little bit by little bit, but over the hours it amounted to a great deal. So we kept calling XMI 416, Tuk, XMI 416, you know,
Emergency,
and so
yes.
on and so on. And we were fortunate in that we had a man from Department of Transport, and he was running the radio because he was there to fix it. Poor man. Anyway, he was, and finally he ended up saying, Mayday, 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 this is XMI 416, Tuk calling, Mayday, Mayday, you know, do you read, do you read? And I'm going to cry, I think, because it was so horrible. But anyway, it ended up that we thought, oh, we didn't have Ringer's lactate, we didn't have anything that we could replace the blood with except saline. Well, you can only take so much saline, you know. Lack of red blood cells, that's the end of you. So we did find some dusty old, looked like wartime bottles of plasma, powdered plasma. So that's a long story. You'll have to read the book to find out about that one. But we ended up thinking, okay, we're going to have to do something with this plasma. And just as we were getting ready to do that, remember the winds were howling by this time, and in comes this parade of men, because the dew line had picked up our signal, and they had used their military lines, and they'd got down to Inuvik. Now the Mounties had just received a 4-engine twin otter, which was filled with all sorts of wonderful instruments so that you knew you could fly in the dark and you could land in the dark and so on. Anyway, they brought a doctor up, and he heard what was going on, and he brought in the needed whatever.
Yeah. So real life and death situations.
Oh, it was terrible.
Yeah.
It really, really was. And so they were able to take the, you'll have to read the book to see what happened.
But again, they came and
the
saved
dew line,
the
they
dew
came
line.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the, you call the radio the beast.
Well, because it very rarely worked, and we'd flick this and flick that, and it would go.
And on that lovely sound, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with Sitting with Sallie. Welcome back to Sitting with Sallie. I have with me Gloria Alcock, who wrote Nurse at the Top of the World, and we're talking about different experiences that she had in a land that is very different from us. We were talking before the break about the beast for radio, and I want to move on to other beasts. Tell me about polar bears.
Well, it's very interesting because when Archie shot a polar bear, this was in Tuk, the call went out, and we all went over to see, and the polar bear was in the back of his toboggan, and it was frozen, and it had to get thawed so he could skin it. Well, eventually it was skinned, and the carcass was broken up into parts, so everybody got a piece.
It sat in the back of his truck?
No, he had a dog sled.
Oh. For how long? Till it was on. Well, you said it was frozen.
Well, I mean, he'd been way out on the ice, or he'd been way out someplace where he shot a polar bear. And so what happens is you go to his house, which was a little log cabin. You had to bend down because I'm tall. So you'd sit there with everybody else, and he'd say, "The dogs barked. I looked. there was a bear. I took my rifle, and he goes through the whole thing of how he shot the bear and how it came towards him and so on. Meanwhile, we're watching his wife. Now, this is looking at a woman's, how she could skin. And so she was holding the hide like this, and with her ulu, she was skinning it out. Now, you have to really, really watch how she does it, because if she does it too thick, the oil will seep through and stain the fur. If she does it too thin, then it'll tear. So everybody's watching. How smart is she? So there she is doing. Also, somebody's making cups of tea. Now, everybody's smoking cigarettes. It's a tiny, whiny, little tiny cabin, smaller than this room. And everybody's smoking, and everybody's drinking tea, and we're all watching her. It was a most wonderful experience.
So the whole time you're all talking, and Archie's talking about she's doing this, and no, she's not joining in the conversation.
No, but we're all watching her, and there might be other pelts around the room. And so you can see that this is a highly successful trapper.
And you said afterwards everybody got a piece of a polar bear?
Yes, it was divided up to the
And how does polar bear taste?
Well, polar bear is an acquired taste.
Fishy, I would think.
Yes, it tastes very, very fishy. It also has it's sort of a pâté almost on your tongue. And because of the fishy taste, if you don't like that, then you have to cook it with a lot of vinegar. So you soak it in vinegar and cook it. That takes the fishy taste out. And it's very good. It's also very, very rich. Now remember, these people were living on fish. And all of a sudden their systems are hit with this very rich fish. And of course, everybody gets diarrhea. So there's a parade into the nursing station saying, oh, I won't stop, stop medicine. So I'm handing out the KO Pectate saying, don't eat too much polar bear. Then I got the trots. And they were all saying, nurse, don't you eat too much polar bear. Of course, it was a good laugh all around.
So Archie was talking about the dogs barked, he looked out and there was a polar bear.
That's right.
Was that common, that you just see a polar bear right there?
In those days, yes, if you went out to the right place. Okay. Now, in Resolute, things were tootling along, and the kids were just coming out of school when the cry went out, there's a polar bear with 2 cubs coming off the ice. Well, you should have seen everybody just grabbed any child that they could find, and it didn't matter whose house you went into. You don't want to get between a mom and her cubs. Well, you just disappear into the houses. And the young Mountie, he came roaring up to the nursing station, what the hell am I going to do? And I said, well, you better talk to Johnny Ekaluk, who was rather a senior elder, and because they only have so many permits that they can shoot. So they decided, the men decided to shoot the mother. So they shot the mother, and then they cut her up and fed her to the cubs, who they had in a warehouse. And then somebody, I don't know, it must have been Navcan, who got hold of somebody down south who said, yes, we'll take the cubs. So it took about a week before somebody flew in to get the cubs. In the meantime, they were eating mum. And everybody was watching them, I presume? No, we didn't go. Okay. No. So, polar bear tastes a bit fishy. What about caribou? Oh, I love caribou. Yes, I'll trade beef. I'll trade, 1,000 chicken dinners for caribou. That's right. It's really, you have to eat it. It's. And you had an experience when you went out hunting caribou? Actually, no. The caribou came to town because we used to have herders of caribou, which are also called reindeer. And I can be corrected on this, but I have been given to understand that the only way you can tell the difference between a reindeer and a caribou is looking at their skull. Oh. So there you go. So, and they're small animals. They're only about that high. I always had the impression that they were big, like a horse. Well, they're not. They're only about that big. And the girl caribous, they grow horns too. And so they brought the herd in close to town, and it was a terrible thing trying to get them off the runway for a plane to land. And as you walk down the street, they're kind of stupid, you have to push them out of the way. Go on, get out, go on, get. So anyway, I was asked, would you like some caribou? Yes, I'd like some caribou. So off we went. And Johnny, no, that was Donald Pingo. He had an axe, and he pulled the toboggan with a box in it. So they said, you pick the caribou. Well, I mean, what do I know about caribou? So I do remember working on a farm when I was young, halter breaking Jersey calves. So I went around giving them a little poke to see which was soft. Just ready, just ripe. And I finally found one, and I said, this one. So they shot it, bang. And then as it fell to the ground, somebody came up with an axe and chopped its legs off and its horns. And then Johnny did a quick skin and broke it into usable pieces and put it in the, that was it, we went home.
You're having caribou.
That's right.
What about now something called quag?
Quack.
Quack?
Quack is frozen fish, and I can remember walking down the street and a friend of mine was, you know, licking, and I said, "What's that?" She says, "It's quack." I said, "What's quack?" She says, "It's frozen fish." I said, "I want some." So she gave me some, and it's really quite good. And then when I was in St. Petersburg in Russia, everybody was walking around with ice cream cones, and it suddenly reminded me of quack. So I bought an ice cream cone. I was walking along thinking, "I just allowed Chuck, thank you so much for introducing me to quack."
I presume quack only comes in one flavor, though.
Frozen fish.
Frozen fish.
Yeah.
Any other? Well, there was bannock, of course. Did you learn to make bannock?
No.
No, but you ate it.
Oh, I sure did.
Of course.
Yeah.
Any other unusual dishes you can recall?
I remember swan stew once, and it
Oh.
kind of put me off.
Yes.
Because, you know, having wandered along the Thames River and seen the swans and so on, it was difficult, but it tasted good.
So many things taste good, yes. Yeah. So, 24 hours daylight sometimes, total dark other times.
Tuktoyaktuk had 6 weeks of total darkness and 6 weeks of total daylight. Resolute had 3 months of total darkness and 3 months of total daylight. And that's when you find out if you've got any screws loose.
Which is harder to take?
I don't mind either, really. I can get along either. But for the people, those who have a propensity for being depressed, they prefer winter because it's easier on them, and they will sleep maybe 15 long time. But in the summer, when the sea lift is in and there's all sorts of new people and there's trucks dashing up and down and clouds of dust and experts all coming to spend their 10 minutes and so on, they couldn't take it. And so I've had people run out onto the ice floes and they get crushed. Or they slit their wrists, you know, the usual thing.
I would think the summer is a real frenetic energy time.
They can't handle it.
And you would forget to sleep sometime because the sun's always up.
That's right.
Okay, well, we'll take another short break and we'll be right back with more stories. We could be here for days. Gloria has a fountain of them. Welcome back to Sitting with Sallie. During the break, Gloria told me that the perfect way to commit a murder is stuff someone down a seal hole.
That's right. End of evidence.
End of everything. So, we were talking before about food, and you made it sound like there was plenty of meat and lots of feasts all the time. But your nursing station, fresh food, I imagine, fresh things were a bit hard to come by?
Well, the government was very generous, and they would send in a plane load of vegetables, like lettuce, celery, and so on. And of course, it was always frozen. And so at first we stuck our nose up and thought, we can't eat that. And then some northerner who'd been there longer than we had said, "Don't be stupid, put it into a stew." So that's what we did, and we had some marvelous stews. So anytime you've got tired lettuce or tired, you know, wilted celery or something along that line, don't chuck it out, you know, cut it up and throw it in a stew.
And it goes. End of a week stew.
The other thing you can do if you've got it, you've got a wok, you can chop it up and throw it in a wok.
And what about the other store of things in your pantry? Whatever kind of things?
Oh, we had everything in there. It was amazing. If we had a large stock of powdered things like cake mixes and bread mixes and tins and tins and tins of everything. It was interesting because the nurse, you were allowed to choose from a large list, and we ordered once a year. But if the nurse before you had liked Chinese food, then it was all Chinese food. If the nurse before you was German, it was all German food. And so you'd go through this storeroom and you think, oh dear, I've never heard of that one.
And I hear you liked a little bit of vanilla in your milk?
Yes, because we used powdered milk and it tastes a little bit like cardboard. And so I was thinking it's a bit icky, and someone said, hey, put a drop of vanilla in it. Perfect. But when I came south, I had to keep putting the vanilla in it until I got used to the ordinary flavor.
And I'm assuming that planes were the main means of in and out. I know there
Yes.
was a ship in the summertime.
Yes.
So how could you tell what plane was coming in by the sound?
I used to be able to.
And what kind of planes?
Oh, Cessnas, Pipers, DC-3s, Twin Otters.
And who was Herman Nelson?
Well, Herman Nelson, I didn't know quite who Herman Nelson was. And I thought I'd met everybody, and so I was thinking, well, who is, because I heard someone say, oh, we got to get Herman Nelson out. And I thought, well, who is he? I thought I met everybody. Turns out it's a great big cape affair that you put over an engine of a plane, and there's a heater to keep it warm. I guess Herman Nelson invented it.
So you got to meet.
I got to meet Herman Nelson.
And behind the Dairy Queen, we've got a bombardier.
Isn't that wonderful?
And you've imagined being in
I have been in that bombardier for many, 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 many times. And every time I go over to Norman, I look at it and I think, hi.
Yes, hi, old friend.
Yeah. Now, the seats were only that wide. So that when I had a patient, I'd have to sit on the floor, and they'd put the one side of the stretcher on the seat and the other stretcher across my shoulders.
Keep it,
yeah,
yep.
And I always carried a cup hook in my pocket, and because it was basically a wooden structure. So I'd put in the cup hook and put up the IV, and then pray, you know, keep it warm so it wouldn't freeze.
With your hands.
Yeah, keep it warm so it wouldn't freeze if we went over the snowdrifts to get to wherever we're going.
And usually you would be going to a plane to evacuate that person.
Yes.
And how long would that ride be?
Well, in Tuck it wasn't very long at all, you know, but in Resolute we had, I don't know, I can't remember, 5 miles maybe from the Eskimo village to this airstrip. So and that was really weird because, you know, having 3 months of darkness, you couldn't see quite where you were going, and they had reflectors about every 20 feet so that the driver, he would have a spotlight and he would go from reflector to reflector, because if you miss a reflector, you stop and you swing the light around until you find it, because if you miss it, you can wander off across the tundra and never be seen again.
I can
You'd
imagine.
just be a moldy mess in the spring.
You never got lost, did you?
I'm not moldy.
No, you're not. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Did you learn to fly the planes at all? Did you get to go up in them?
Well, I was in them, in and out of them all the time. Yep. And once in a while, the pilot would say, "I want to sleep here. Just do this," and I'd say, "Okay."
There was nothing else in the sky.
Yeah.
Ice pitter? Is that how?
Oh, the ice pits. In Tuktoyaktuk, there is some very smart fellow dug a shaft down quite a distance, maybe 30 feet, like a mine shaft, and you climb down on the ladder, and then there was a shaft out this way, and a shaft out that way, and a shaft out there. And then they dug holes, rooms, and people could store their meat, like the fish or the ducks or the geese or something, in there, and there was a door on it, and usually they had somebody's name on it, so you knew that. One door was particularly interesting. It said, "Set gun." You know, don't enter. Don't enter. Set gun. And we always thought, I wonder if it really is. I never had the guts to
So the ice pits would be there summer and winter, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that was people's larders.
That's right.
And did you have one, or did you?
No. That was for the people. We had an ice house, but basically we had a big freezer, so there were a couple of freezers.
So you were spoiled.
But I think before they had electricity, or you know, electricity was pretty scarce, because they had to do it with a diesel, providing the electricity, so that the people were smart. They had these ice pits.
Oh, in the nursing station, you would have the sound of a diesel going all the time.
In the distance, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did you ever get bushed?
Yes, I've been bushed 2 or 3 times.
And what happens?
Well, you become. It's a horrible feeling, because you try to go to sleep, and every time a car goes by, you think that's for me, or you hear people walking by, and you think that's for me.
As a nurse, you think
as a nurse, because you're on call all the time. And even if you have another nurse working with you and it's her turn to be on call, you still hear. And you lie in bed and you think, oh dear, I wonder what's going on, I wonder what's going on. And then sometimes she'll say, come and help me. You know, so that it took me about 3 months when I was going to university to get over the business of, that is not for me. All you have to do is go and study, go to class, take a walk, that's it. Now sharpen up, it's not for you. The phone rings, it's not you. And I talked to my fellow students who had also done nursing station work, and they said, yeah. And you know, Sally, I really believe we all suffered. I've talked to several outpost nurses, and I think we all had that post-traumatic stress.
Because you would see quite traumatic stuff.
Yes.
incidents, and
Yep.
I imagine there's certain people that you knew wouldn't make it,
That's right.
and there was nothing you could
I
do.
never had a death.
Okay.
I was extremely fortunate.
Yes.
Never had a death.
Yes, because
Close to,
that
but
woman you were talking about that was basically bleeding out
Yeah.
slowly was very close.
yeah.
Well, that's fortunate because I imagine that that's not uncommon.
Mm.
So looking back, anything else you'd like to sort of parting comments?
Well, Sally, as you know, I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but maybe we have to draw it to a close.
All right, and as we draw it to a close, you are also leaving Kenora to start on a new adventure.
That's right. I think it's time that I have a new adventure. I've been here for something like 44 years. I came in 1971, and out of all the places in Canada I could have picked, I picked Kenora because I wanted it. I mean, I've lived in London, England, I've lived in Edinburgh, Toronto, I've lived in big cities and so on, but I've also lived in utter isolation. And so I thought, now what do I really need? I can't go back to isolation because I've been bushed, and that's. So I want a place I can walk down the street and say hi to everybody, and I want a place that I don't have to go somewhere to go shopping. That's exactly what Kenora gave me.
Yeah, and you've been very involved in a number of community
Yes.
community efforts, and on behalf of the cat shelter, I would also like to thank you. We always sneak the cat shelter in somehow.
Absolutely.
So we do wish you the very best. I hope you find community where you're going, and thank you for being part of Kenora for so long.
Thank you.
Okay. And join us again for Sitting with Sallie next time.